Hey guys, so in Pauline studies and studies about the new perspective and old perspective and what are the works of the law referred to, sometimes you'll see scholars talking about, well, the Judaism understood it was elected by grace. Judaism taught that God chose the Jewish people. And you'll see some scholars say, well, Paul never accuses the Jews of thinking that they earned their salvation. Now there's a nuance here, because there is, what does Judaism teach? And now even when you talk about what Judaism teaches, you can say, well, what did God teach the Jews? What does the Old Testament teach? Versus what did the Jews themselves teach and believe? I think you can see the difference there. It's like, what does Christianity teach? And then what do Christians teach? It's different. They're different things. So even when we're talking about what did Judaism teach, it's very important to distinguish what the Old Testament teaches, what God teaches, and then what Jews themselves thought. Now, obviously, the Old Testament teaches that God chose the Israelite people despite their stubbornness, despite their hard hearts, despite their sin, that he elected them by grace. Now, the question is, then, well, one of the questions then is, did the Jews teach that? We know Judaism, the Bible, the Old Testament, taught that, but did the Jews teach that? And, well, scholars like E.P. Sanders and those who follow him will say, no, the Jewish people during the Second Temple period, during the time of Jesus and Paul, they knew that they were elected by grace. They didn't have any kind of widespread, explicit, conscious articulation of like, no, we earn our covenant status or something like that. Okay, so here we can make another distinction. What do Jews say that they believe? And then what do they actually believe? And here, if you think I'm being unfair to the Jews, I'm not. So we can look at what do Christians say that they believe, and what do Christians actually believe? And this is distinct from what does Christianity teach. Here's the subject. Say, for example, pornography. What does Christianity teach about pornography? Well, it doesn't say anything specifically, but the Bible in the New Testament does condemn lust and fornication and adultery, so there we can infer that Christianity is against pornography. And then what do Christians teach about pornography? Now, here's, well, are Christians being faithful to what Christianity teaches? What are Christians saying? Well, if we scan Christian literature today, we'll see virtually unanimously that every Christian writer, every Christian blogger, everyone agrees that pornography is wrong and sinful. However, if we were looking to the behavior of Christians, we would see that the use of pornography is absolutely rampant, especially younger people, especially younger men. So, there is a distinction between what people teach and what they actually believe. And I think that's also important when we're talking about Second Temple Judaism and trying to understand what Paul's saying. Now, when it comes to earning salvation, thinking that you're making God you're putting God in debt to yourself, that you're a good person, that you deserve, blessings and things like that. That's natural to the human being. That's a quintessential human sin. The Jews weren't unique in that. And in the Old Testament, God had to remind the Jews about that several times. God says, hey, don't think that it's because of your righteousness that I'm blessing you and choosing you and bringing you into this land. No, remember, you're very sinful and stubborn, so don't think it's because you're righteous. So the Jews would say, hey, we're righteous because we're chosen by God's people. We're the righteous chosen people, unlike you Gentile sinners. But they also were always tempted to think God chose us because we are righteous people. Our father Abraham was very righteous. He was one of the most righteous people on the planet, and that's why God chose him. And it's just in our bloodline to be righteous people, and that's why God chose us, is because we're good and we're better than everyone else. That was part of what Jews were tempted with. Now, Judaism didn't have an explicit teaching about that, but that's what Jews, as human beings, were tempted to believe and think. As we see in the Old Testament, God had to repeatedly warn them, not by strength, not by power, but my spirit. Don't think I chose you because of your righteousness. These are things God says in the Old Testament to the Jews. And the Jews during Paul's day, just like all human beings of all times, were tempted to think this, despite the fact that in their explicit teachings, just like in explicit Christian teachings, we say pornography is wrong, but people still watch it. The Jews likewise were tempted with this. And so when looking at the scholarship on this issue, it's important to keep in mind these distinctions and nuances, because sometimes, like William Barclay in his book Paul and the Gift says, nowhere does Paul accuse the Jews of thinking that they're earning salvation. And then he also says, and Paul doesn't accuse anyone of that. Well, Barclay is wrong, but you see what he's doing? He's saying that Paul isn't accusing people of thinking that. And that's an important distinction, because someone like James Dunn would say, when Paul does talk about earning salvation or earning righteousness by good works, and James Dunn would say that, yeah, actually in Romans 4, Paul does talk about that. However, Paul is talking about that because his audience already agrees with him. So, the old more so-called Lutheran interpretation would be that Paul in that passage, and Paul generally, attacks earning righteousness by your good works because he's trying to counter what's latent in his audience. The Jews are trying to earn salvation. Gentiles are being told they need to earn salvation. Paul knows human beings, generally speaking, try to earn salvation. So Paul's making that argument to attack what his audience is tempted with. What Dunn would say, and Dunn would say, generally speaking, Paul isn't talking about earning your righteousness by your good works. But when Paul does talk about that in Romans 4, and this is important because he actually admits Paul does talk about trying to earn righteousness through your good works. But what James Dunn would say is that that's not to counter what Jews believed, but that's because Jews already agreed with him. So when Paul says, to the one who works, wages are not a gift, but what is owed, but to the one who does not work, but trust in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. Paul says that because he knows his audience will agree with him. The Jews would be like, oh yeah, that's true. And then Paul will use that agreement to springboard into a discussion about why works of the law aren't necessary. Why following the Torah isn't necessary. So these are just some nuances that are important to keep in mind. Exegetically, historically, socially, psychologically, and when we're reading people, be very, very careful to read their very specific words. If someone's a real scholar, they're careful about their words and what they're saying. If they say, Jews did not believe this, however, Paul still says it for X and Y reason, that's different. Or if they say, Paul doesn't say it regardless, that's another thing. Or if they might say, the Old Testament did not teach this. Now, here's where some people might fall into error. Some people fall into error because they say, hey, the Old Testament taught that Jews were elected by grace. Therefore, of course, Judaism teaches election by grace. Therefore, of course, the Jews knew they were elected by grace. Therefore, Paul would never argue against the idea that you earn your election through good works, because the Jews already knew that. Now, you see, that line of reasoning is entirely fallacious, as we've already seen. There's distinctions between what does God say, what do Jews teach, or what does people teach, what do people teach, whether Jew or Christian, and then what do people actually believe. There's a big leap from one to the other. So these are just a couple of my thoughts here. Thanks, guys, for listening. God bless y'all.